Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk about what I'm planning on doing to help prepare us better for garden season 2023. And I'm hoping with all the changes we've been seeing in the weather, both the extreme cold and the extreme heat, that we can all kind of come together and help give each other ideas that will prepare us for the worst of the weather that we're going to see. And maybe it will be the best. We can really only base what next year is going to be like on the pattern that we've seen happen in the past several years. So for here, it's been getting progressively colder and colder, and our season's been getting shorter and shorter. However, thankfully this year, even though our season started even later than before, than the previous years, thankfully, it actually extended out to be into the fall, which is the first time I've seen that happen in many years. I expected it wasn't going to, but I prayed that it would, and thankfully it did. This is just a few of everything that we're kind of finishing up with the fall garden. And keep in mind, this video is shot towards the end of October. You'll be seeing it closer to at least middle of November or later. But anyway, if it wasn't for our late summer that we've been having, I wouldn't see the production of beans. And this is I still got a lot more out there to harvest, or zucchini, maybe the zucchini, but you know, the cucumbers, the tomatoes, the corn, and so much more. And this is just a few that I brought in. There's still plenty out there that's drying on the stalk. And again, the tomatoes. In fact, I have, since we're starting to get some, we got frost this morning, I've been bringing in all the green tomatoes and just now tossing them in a box that I go through every day to see. And you can see in here, there's some smaller ones down there of the vernissages that are turning red. That's the first vernissages are these ones, but these are even smaller than usual because, well, it's the end of the season. The tomatoes don't get as big at the end of the season. Even though I'm very thankful that our summer extended out longer this year, I cannot be guaranteed that's going to happen next year if we have another very late starting season. And in fact, our season ended up being so cold this last year that it killed a lot of my tomato starts. So thankfully, I always start a lot just in case. And if it hadn't been for that, I'm not sure that I would be have seen the tomato production that I've had. So, and again, this is just end of the season tomatoes. I've already got a lot put up. So as I said, I have to assume that next year I'm not going to see this, but it'd be better for me to assume that the weather's going to keep getting colder and colder and seasons shorter and shorter, as has been the pattern for the past several years. But I also have to assume that we might have another, like happened to us in 2021, a 3-day stretch of very unusually hot weather that burnt up some of our plants last year. So we got to be prepared on both sides. So if you're those living in the South that have been dealing with some of the extreme heat, some of the things that we've been doing for the first time is investing in shade cloth. We've never had to do that before. But because of what happened to us in 2021, and we got a little bit of taste of that in 2022, we thought that would be a good investment. But mostly we're looking at finding more ways to protect our vegetation against the cold. So we've had a greenhouse for many years, but it was never fully insulated. Just down below it was, but we still had it open on the baffling. So one of the things we thought a little too late in the season, but it did make a difference, was to take a lot of that extra padding that we get with our Misfits Market boxes, and we've been cutting those in strips and then filling in that open spot between the roof and the walls, and that really made a difference in there. And in fact, I think that's part of the reason why we also saw a great amount of cucumbers and tomatoes come in, because it finally really was able to warm up in there because it was able to hold the heat in. And then we did also this past year covered one of our archways. It was the archway we put in 2021, and then this year we covered it, and I went ahead and grew some beans in there. Now here's the thing, the beans that I planted in there were the last ones I planted, because I kind of do, or I'll plant some one week, some the next week, some the next week, and I always try to start in areas where I know they're going to grow first, and then the areas that are less protected I plant in there last. Well, because I wasn't sure we were going to cover that area yet, I waited until after he covered it And by then I had all my other beans in the ground. Well, I'm so thankful I did that because even though our late summer helped me to get a lot more beans off of the more open areas that aren't as protected, having that covered area, I'm seeing a lot of beans in there. Now, here was the last picture I took out there. I haven't taken any recent pictures, but I've been picking a lot of dry beans off there. Still a lot of fresh beans in there. So that and another area that stays pretty protected because it's right up against a greenhouse are two of the places my beans are still actually growing. The rest of them are all done and slowly drying a little bit at a time. So by watching what this is doing, that's telling me I need to have another covered area. So another example was we got some beans from the neighbor, and in the other area that we plan on covering this next year, but we had yet to cover, we just had the archway put with the cattle panels for growing snow peas, beans, and so on, squash and more. The beans in 2021 that he grew just right across the street did great for him. So I thought, okay, no problem. I'll go ahead and dedicate this whole section to these beans. They should grow great for me because I'm right across the street. No, they didn't. In fact, I finally went out there. We finally got some beans off of them, and I went out there and counted them the other day. 12 whole beans, just, bean pods. That's all I got out of all the bean plants I put in there. They sprouted, they started to do great, but they sat that high for about 2 months. Then slowly started growing. And I've already been picking beans. I've already canned green beans from these beans. I've already been collecting dry beans from these, and now I'm finally seeing the beans on that. Well, that's going to come to another thing I got to point out that I broke my own rule on, is that whenever you're starting something new, which you should always try something new, it's always good to try to keep a good variety of each type of thing you grow, even if it's just 2 of each type. 2 different types of beans, 2 different types of tomatoes. I would say 3 or 4 even. But don't, when you're trying something new for the first time, don't dedicate a whole garden section just to that, because if it doesn't do well in your area like these beans didn't, then you just wasted all that space. Try growing just a couple of them or a few in a small area and then see how they do for you. And then at that point, you can save the seeds from that and then plant them next year. If they're doing great, then you'll know. So while I may still save the beans off there and try those again, I'm not going to dedicate another whole section to them when I could have been growing more of these or more squash, which I didn't get much squash this year. In fact, all I got was 2, which I didn't even bring in here. All I got was 2 of my pie pumpkins. That was all I got. And that was in the covered area too. Though the beans did excellent, I only got a few cucumbers in that particular area. The cucumbers did best in the actual greenhouse, but only 2 pumpkins out of all that. Part of that, though, too, was due to the fact that we didn't see a lot of honeybees coming out until much later in the season. In fact, I was really concerned we weren't going to get any honeybees, and suddenly we finally started getting them, which then they started getting in the greenhouse and then pollinating my cucumbers. So anyway, keep growing the things that you know do well for you, and don't waste space. Don't waste a whole lot of space on trying new stuff. For new things, small areas only, and then you can see how it goes. But it's now more important than ever that we don't waste any garden space or large portions of it. It's not a waste if you're trying out a little bit, because that's how you're going to learn and know what's going to grow best for you. And just because it does well for your neighbor across the street, and I knew this before this and still I fell for it, it doesn't mean it's going to grow as well for you, because you may have varying soil conditions, or maybe it's one area for one person is more protected from either too much sun or too much cold than the other person's. And all these things can make various different microclimates that's going to determine what's going to do best for you. So coming back to that covered area, yes. After I saw what was happening in the archway that we covered, I decided for certain we're going to cover that second archway. Initially, I didn't want it done because it's where I grow my snow peas, and snow peas can easily get too hot. But what I've decided is go ahead and cover that early in the season, plant the snow peas in there a lot earlier than I would. And then by the time the weather starts getting too warm for them to be in that covered area, they will be done. And then I can plant some more beans or squash or something in there, pull up all the pea plants. And then I also did dedicate another section outside in in a non-covered area to snow peas, where I'll plant those at the same time I would have in the other area. And that's right there at the end of the chicken yard, because there's already horse fencing for them to climb on. So I tried it out this last year. It worked good. So I'm definitely going to be doing that this next year. Consider looking for more ways to plant and making the most of your space. Every year I try to find a new area to expand and work on and change things up so I can grow more stuff. Because if you're new to my channel, you might not realize that even though we have a couple other bigger pieces of property, we're still doing all of our main gardening right here on our little shy 1/3 acre corner lot in the neighborhood. And I like that because it's where we live right now, and so everything's close. I don't always have to run down the road to go, like when I go to get the blackberries and other things that grow wild down there and the spruce tips. I don't have to do that with everything. So I like it just right out my door. So I grow stuff in pots on my front deck, on my back deck. I have a front yard garden that slowly I expanded over the years. Still always looking for more ways to expand, and may expand that out even farther at some point. And have tried to find every way I can to turn every inch of my backyard either into chicken yard area or vegetable and fruit growing areas. Learn to work with what you have and make the most out of it. And again, I always come back to this. Even if you're living in an apartment, if you have a balcony where you can grow stuff out there, I know people that are already doing that. Or even inside, if you don't have a balcony, you must have a window somewhere that you can look at putting some things in pots, especially herbs. Herbs can do quite well in pots, in a windowsill, or anywhere close to where they're getting a lot of natural light. And lettuces, there's a lot of things people can do. I don't do a lot of that stuff indoors here because there's just not enough places where we get enough sunlight, especially through the year, because we live in rain country and there's almost always constant cloud cover, except for this fall. It's been beautiful. Oh, and coming back to the using every bit of space, think of all the unconventional ways that you can grow stuff. Just like I will grow beans around just about anything. I'll grow them around my fruit trees. I grew them this last year on my little fig plant out here. And anything that, because I grow climbers to make the most of my space, and because they always seem to be the best producers, I can grow them around anything that they can climb on. A lot of people think, well, I got to put in this fencing. Well, do you already have something in place, like a fruit tree or something that's already there that they could naturally climb on? Go with that. Try that first. I grow beans in a pot on the deck and let them climb up some chains up to the roof of our garage out there. And anything like that. I do that I actually have several pots where I grow beans that they have something that they can climb on, even though I still have the dedicated bean areas out in the main garden. And you can do that with snow peas. You can do that with anything that climbs. Or just like out here in the front yard garden, I have some shrubs out there I'd like to leave that are not something that I grow for food. They've just always been there. But I will grow like a lot of my peppermint grows right there under my rhododendron and my azalea. Those aren't something I would use for food, but I like to leave them in there because they're pretty. I can still grow all those mints under there and still get a good harvest of my peppermint. So just another couple of examples. And you might be surprised, especially when it comes to herbs, how much you can kind of cram together and let grow side by side. Because I do that with my West herb garden and then this little narrow strip of garden, and even in the front yard garden, where anywhere I've got herbs growing, a lot of them are just crammed together and they do well. If it starts looking like something's overtaken something else, just rip it up and then downsize it a bit, like I have to do with my stinging nettle every single year. If you're putting a lot of mulch on your soil, that's going to keep that soil looser, so it is easier to pull up the things like your mints and your stinging nettle and so on, and your comfrey even, that wants to grow, under the ground and spread this way. And ways that you can do that doesn't have to cost a lot of money is, a lot of people will do the Back to Eden garden, and that is really great. For a lot of people, that works great. It doesn't work great for everyone, and especially if it costs you money to get wood chips brought out. Some people can't afford to do that, or they don't have access to such things. But what are things that you can get for free? Well, consider leaves. The maple leaves from our neighbor over here, we'll get those and we'll just pile them on our garden in the fall. And anyone else we can get leaves from. We'll do that with grass clippings. Grass clippings from, as long as we know people aren't spraying their grass with any kind of weed killer, and we'll get grass from out at our other property and bring that in, and we'll just start dumping that in all our garden areas. Just thick layer of grass. It makes a great mulch layer. And for the things that don't like a high acid soil, then you can still use that, but pile that on in the fall when those things are done, and then let that break down through the winter, and then it should be great for planting in the spring. In fact, I still pile grass clippings around our zucchini out front. I don't put it as thick around those as I would my potatoes, but I still put them around there, and they don't have any problem with the grass clippings. But if you get them too thick in some places, it can get too hot and it can burn some of your vegetation. So you just got to be careful. So for some things, it's better to kind of put a thin layer around your plants. And what that does also is in the summertime, if you're putting that on there, just a layer that's maybe only about this thick on the soil around your plants that are already growing, it will help hold in moisture. So if water is a concern, that's one way you can do that. If you don't have access to wood chips, wood shavings are good. You just have to be careful of certain ones, like black walnut and cedar can actually kill your plants. But I've also heard of some people that will mix black walnut in with other types of woods and not have any issues. I have not done that. I try to be careful of that. A lot of times most of your perennials can handle that, but a lot of your annuals can't. So typically you're looking at hardwoods and not black walnut when you're talking about that. A lot of your softer woods like cedar can be a bit much, a little too acidic for some plants. So I always just take all that into consideration when Pat's doing a lot of woodworking in a shop. What kind of wood shavings does he have? And then we'll take, if he does try to be conscientious of keeping the black walnut and cedar away from the other ones, and then those ones we'll take and we'll just put them in all garden areas. So grass clippings, leaves, wood shavings, and then the other thing is the bedding from the chicken coop, which we usually about 2 to 3 times a year we'll scoop all that out, we'll throw it in the garden, so all the straw and all the chicken poop, and let that break down. And usually in the fall, about this time of year, is when we'll clean that out and do it again so it can break down through the winter. And then in the spring, we'll do it again, but in the spring I try to be a little more careful about where I put it because of all the chicken poop. So it's generally in the spring, I'm definitely going to put it where I'm going to grow corn, because corn really likes that kind of stuff. And putting it on my blueberries and around any other berry plants is great. So again, it doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg to get good mulch. There's probably plenty you can get even just from your own yard by mowing your yard and taking that grass clippings and throwing it in there, raking up your leaves, throwing them in there. So I think I covered all the main things that we're kind of looking at for this year. I feel like there's more I was going to talk about, but that's okay, because I would really like for my followers to go ahead and put some thoughts and ideas. What changes are you making to your garden to better prepare for next year, be it for extreme cold like we've typically had to deal with, or extreme heat, or either one, just like us going ahead and making sure we have that shade cloth in case we get another heat wave that wants to burn up all of our plants like it did to my gooseberry last year. So share with us down below, and let's all learn from each other here and help encourage each other to keep working and keep trying. And remember, every quote unquote failure isn't really a failure if you learn something from it and it gives you a better idea of what to do for next year. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.